Hi, my name is Sharon, and I'm one of the vascular students in the program. And I'm just going to start out by giving you some advice based on what I've learned since I've been in the program. Um, I'm sure some of the other students have already mentioned this as well, but there's a lot to learn in a short period of time. So, my first advice to you would be to try to arrange your schedule in advance so that you don't have any major life planned events coming within the 10 and a half to 11 month period of this program, because it's really challenging to fit in any major traveling or like family events that have to occur that is going to take you away from your studies or your clinical time. Also, one of the most important things and things that worked well for me was create a study schedule. I have had a study schedule that is pretty much the same every week. Like, I know what days I'm going to be in clinical and what days I have for my part-time job and what days I have to study, and I stick to those. But I also start by looking at each class at the beginning of the week and looking at the responsibilities and adjusting my schedule if need be based on what responsibilities I have to do in class. And also, I would recommend work ahead when possible, because also there's always unplanned life events and you still have to have your stuff turned in on time. So if you can work ahead whenever possible, do that, because then you can still turn your stuff in on time. The third piece of advice that I would give is, if you have a question or concern about any of your classes, there's usually a question forum or a question and answer forum within each classroom. And so post your question or concern early and wait no more than 24 hours for a response. If you don't get a response from your instructor within 24 hours, then I would contact them via whatever method they told you was the best, which is either email, calling, or texting. Because if you get too far behind and you wait too long, then you're not going to be able to move forward in your classroom. But of course, all the instructors, they're not going to want all the students emailing them and texting them the same question. So that's why it's important to post first. And then if they don't answer within 24 hours, because not everybody's not all the instructors are checking in all the time, but you may need your answer sooner so you can move on with your program. So post it, wait 24 hours. If you don't get an answer, call or text them. And then I would also recommend that you go back to that the question and forum posting and post so the other students see it, that you reached out to the instructor via email or text, so they know not to send her a bunch of emails and texts as well. Okay, then my biggest challenge was because I had to finesse my way into my local clinical, because we didn't have a relationship where I'm in Vermont, and we didn't have a relationship with Jackson. I had to finesse my way into my clinical, and they already had two existing students. So for me to be mindful and respectful of their lab's workload and their patient priority, as well as the other students, but still assert my learning goals and make sure I got my learning goals completed, that was a challenge for me, because you want to be respectful, but you also want to be assertive. So that was just one of my major challenges. And then concept I struggled with on and off throughout the program, and I think mainly it's because, well, maybe it could be a little better explained at the beginning of the program, or maybe it's just because you have to obtain a certain amount of knowledge before you can get all this concept with this. But it's waveform analysis, and one of the reasons why I think it is a little bit challenging to understand, and even though I feel like I have a good understanding of it now, is that there's kind of like a two-part process to it. And the first part that you need to understand is the physiology behind each phase of a waveform. For instance, the systolic part of the waveform versus the diastolic part of the waveform. What are they? What do they mean? What are they representing as far as blood flow in the body? And also forward flow versus reverse flow. So what part of the waveform represents that? And again, what is it doing in your body to create that waveform? And then the second part of waveform analysis that makes it tricky to understand is that I've learned is that the analogy in nomenclature differs based on the area of the body you're scanning. For instance, the carotid versus the peripherals. So you use different analogy and different nomenclature when you're reporting or thinking about those parts of those exams. And then also within that is you also use different nomenclature and analogies depending on the type of exam. For instance, duplex spectral waveforms versus continuous wave Doppler and pulse volume recording waveforms and digital plethysmography waveforms. They all have different ways of analyzing them and use sort of different nomenclature with them, slightly different. So understanding all of that within waveform analysis, I think makes it somewhat complicated to learn, but you get it as you go. So questions I struggled most with. Calculating formula questions on the physics exams, I felt like I had the concepts down, and I felt like, I understand how to convert like centimeters to millimeters, the metric conversions and stuff. But within the physics program, unlike in the prerequisite course, your quizzes are, the timing you get is a lot shorter. So the time you have to solve that problem is not very long. And I also have test anxiety like a lot of people. So I was kind of freezing up on those. So what I would recommend for other students is, even if you feel solid on the concept, go through and solve a bunch of equations over and over again until you also feel like you're fast at the conversions and fast at just solving the equations. And that way when you get to the quizzes to answer them, you'll be faster as well. And then also with timing, for me, answering the write-in questions or the essay type questions. I think there was only a few classes in the first semester that had some write-in and essay questions on their exam. Most of them are multiple choice, but although I feel well written, I'm also slow at putting together sentences. I like to be concise, and I got caught up in that and frozen on that. So I would recommend just go through, answer your multiple choice, and come back to those and just put something down, put words down. Don't worry about forming full sentences. Just try to get the concept down, and you'll either get all credit or partial credit, at least for them, and versus nothing at all. So strategies, I just mentioned a couple strategies based on my struggles, but also some general strategies that I used was one, when for studying, most classes have learning goals at the beginning of each lesson. They're either embedded in the lesson or they're separate from the lesson. So I always read through the learning goals and then completed my lesson, did my reading, also watched the videos or whatever else I needed or wanted to do, and then I would go back to the learning goals and answer, because they were kind of written as little like several separate goals within the lesson. I would write a written answer to each goal, and if I couldn't formulate a whole answer, I would go back and study that more, and that helped me really solidify my memory of the lesson. And also when going to quizzes that did have write-ins, I a lot of times had already written an answer to a question because it had been one of the goals, and they used that as one of the questions on the quizzes. The other strategy, again, I'll reiterate, there's not a lot of time, so review weekly responsibilities early in the week and create a study schedule and stick to it. And then my third strategy is, everybody's a little different with how they learn and how they memorize things or put things to long-term memory. But for me, I'm a visual person, so a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I know some people like songs or some people like acronyms, but I'm definitely a visual person. So I would either look for videos to help me memorize a concept or learn a concept, and also images, and I would copy images and put them in my add them to my notes. The other thing I would do is if I couldn't find an image, I would create an image to help me memorize a concept. For instance, on the physics prerequisite course, to remember all the physics concepts and as well as the equations, I came up with a bunch of pictorials. Some were already some were from the books, and some were some that I just created myself. And I drew them all out on this piece of paper, a regular letter size piece of paper. And then when I went in for my proctored exam, they give you scrap paper and a pencil. I sat down and drew it all out and then started my exam, and then I could use that to refer to rather than recalling it all. Like I had the list of metric conversions, and I had all that was written out on there, so I didn't have to try to recall it and stay on time to keep taking my test on time. And I did really well on that, on the prerequisite physics exam. So I really learned from that is to use pictures to help me study. So whatever your thing is, if it's pictures, draw some, draw them out repetitively so that you'll be able to do it fast, and then use that to recall from. So with that too, I'll also say for the registry exam, as far as studying for that, I haven't started yet. Unlike other people, I'm taking my physics now, and a lot of the other class members have already taken their physics, and I waited because I started late with my, I didn't have the probe skills in the beginning, and I felt like I really wanted to dedicate myself to my clinical. I wasn't ready to take physics on last semester, so I saved it for this semester. So I'm planning to take my physics and my registry exam. Like my physics I might do in August, then my registry I'll probably do in September. So when these last classes end, then I'll start studying. But I plan to use Capstone, which is the online program the school's suggesting. And then also my labs have flashcards and some other study materials that I'm going to use, and just do a bunch of repetitive studying, and that's what I'm planning to use for the registry exam. My biggest achievement, lining up my clinical. I mentioned this previously, but lining up my clinical, I had to reach out to my local contacts, find somebody that knew somebody in the hospital. I set up shadowing. I started in general, and then I did a shadowing in Echo. I really liked my shadowing in Echo and tried to get them to host me. But they had a student coming in from the other college that they were committed to, even though they don't teach it locally. They have a commitment to another college, so they weren't willing to take me on. So then I used them to help me get a shadowing in vascular. And when I did my shadowing in vascular, I really loved that. And I could also see that the supervisor of the program was really valued learning and teaching. So I used that to my advantage, and I stayed in touch with him. And unfortunately, right before he had to make his decision, he emailed me that one of their techs had quit or moved on to another job, and they had 2 students already, and he didn't think he'd be able to help me out. But I didn't take no for an answer, and I just really, really finessed him into saying yes. And so I was really proud of myself for getting that clinical and not taking no for an answer. And it's really worked out well for me. And then also, since I've been in the clinical program, I worked with my supervisor to line up another clinical in a sister hospital. It's within a general ultrasound lab, so that I can pick up some general exams and work there outside my expected or required clinical hours. I work there, and I'm hoping to pick up some clinical exam studies so that I can be more marketable. And finally, aspects of the program that worked for me. I would say the biggest thing that worked for me, again, I'm in Vermont. There's no other school here, no brick and mortar school where I can go to learn ultrasound. So for me, the online opportunity was the biggest opportunity for me. And I really am glad that Jackson offered that, and grateful. And also, I've really kind of fallen in love with the flexibility of online training. Uh, I, I, I think it really kind of holds you to, your responsibilities, even though some people might fear that they aren't, strict enough with their schedule to get their work done. I think the way online programs are set up with start dates and turn in dates, like you're still kind of working towards getting things done, and that yet you have the flexibility. So if you do have unplanned life moments, you can work around that. And also allowed me to stay in Vermont and also work my part-time job. Um, and then I'll say the only drawback with online training is because you aren't face to face with your instructor, you do sometimes have to wait for a reply when you have a question, and that can be hard sometimes. So keep that in mind, but try to just stick with it, and still the benefits outweigh the obstacles. But I hope that my information helped you, maybe new students, get a little further along and understand and get over the hump sooner. And thanks so much. All right, bye-bye.